Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Niche Cast. I am the Diggity Doodah Doc, Mr. Pepsi Panther, here with the Wobbly Wildcard as we have a Kiwi sports extravaganza for the Niche Cast this week. As usual, to be honest, I mean, Aotearoa is the greatest sporting nation in the world, KG for KG, and we are going to provide another example, another case of evidence as to why that is the case. We have some updates with Lydia Co. We've just watched Steven Adams in the NBA playoffs. We've got a UFC fight card featuring 4 city kickboxing fighters. We also have Kiwis in the Caribbean Premier League. So we're going to update all of those things, offer a bit of information and a bit of value, and then we'll get a deep dive into the Wellington Phoenix season. We will get another little deep dive into Flying Kiwis matters. Winston Reid came out of his footballing hibernation, and he's back. Well, he's not back. He went hibernation under the ocean, and now he's in the USA. And we also have 2 more NRL debutants from the land of Aotearoa. That means we've got 11 Kiwi NRL debutants in the 2020 season, and that's rather amazing. Plus, that might lead us into a bit of discussion around the New Zealand Aotearoa Warriors. Best way to support the Niche Cache and the Niche Cast is on Patreon. Support us straight up the guts there. And we also deliver a email newsletter Mondays and Fridays full of weird shit that doesn't fit anywhere else. Wobbly Wildcard. We are still rolling through. We're in Auckland. We're still rolling through a bit of lockdown stuff. Everything's smooth sailing though, because we've got a shitload of Kiwi sports on, and that's all honkadory. How are things up in the naughty north with yourself?
I mean, it's same old for me. I mean, I still played football on the weekend. I didn't tell you about football. We played. I shouldn't throw any names out here, but we played the home return fixture of the grudge match that we played earlier in the season, and conceded in the 3rd minute of the game and equalised in the 90th minute of the game. So they were leading. This is a team who had to travel about an hour and a half to get to play us, and they were leading for about 87 minutes of the game and then left with a 1-1 draw. It felt like a victory, honestly. Yeah, and that's just life as per in the naughty north, I suppose. We can't go anywhere. Like, unlike the rest of the country, you can kind of travel between the rest of the country. You can't go anywhere from outside of Northland unless you get on a plane or a boat, because you've got to go through Auckland otherwise. But that's fine. It means the rest of the country can't come up here either. So it's all good up here.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're stuck in the northern regions of Aotearoa, why the fuck would you want to go anywhere else?
Worst places to be, Worst places to be.
Just a quick, we will go deep into rugby league matters, but quick shout out to the Northland Rugby League, because Paul Turner made his debut for the New Zealand Warriors, and I've chucked it out, Twitter, Facebook, everywhere. Beautiful nugget. Paul Turner. I think he was the MVP of this tournament as well. But back in 2015, Paul Turner and Parramatta Eels half Dylan Brown were part of the same Northern Swords, which is like Northland Rugby League, under 15 team. So they're in the same team, and I'd assume they were the halves combination. And they're both playing NRL right now. So that's a beautiful thing. And obviously there is a absolute shitload of simmering rugby league talent from the northern region. Wildcard, I got a bit of music that I just want to get us started here with. A couple weeks ago, I was listening to the Versace tapes, which is Boldy James from The Price of Tea in China fame earlier this year. So another big year. Well, a big year for Boldy James. He collaborated with The Alchemist, and now he released a thing with Griselda with Jay Versace on the production, and I bring that up. It was fantastic piece of music, but I bring it up in conjunction with another project by a producer, I think, named Black Noise, and he's got a project called Oblivion, I think it is, with the likes of Earl Sweatshirt. You got Danny Brown there as well, and it's another good project. But those two projects have in common, like a avant-garde hip-hop style that, I mean, Griselda Records are very into portraying their music as fine art and high fashion and that kind of aesthetic. But between the Versace tapes and Black Noise, I view it as like a hip-hop fine art. It's very avant-garde, but it also is very fine arty. And those are two projects that I've been enjoying. And also, quick shout out to the Midnight Riders and the Naram Rhythm Section. They are from Aotearoa, and they've got a project named Midnight Riders Meet Naram Rhythm Section. Bit of Aotearoa reggae from Timata, somewhere in Aotearoa. I have to do a Google search of where Timata is via Red Robin Records. So a bit of Aotearoa reggae, beautiful music, and a bit of fine art, avant-garde hip-hop to get us started here. Wildcard.
Yeah, beautiful. I've got a couple things probably on the musical front. The things I've been listening to the most over the last week, since we last chatted, would be there's an album called Welcome to Conceptual Beach by a band called Young Jesus, who are sort of like great name for a band, by the way. It's sort of what would I call them? Sort of art rocky type indie kind of band, quite cinematic at times. Reminds me a lot of those Talk albums from the late 80s, early 90s, Spirit of Eden in particular, which is a very good touching point if you're going to borrow off of something. So that album, that album goes pretty hard. And also there's this band called Vintage Crop, an Aussie punk band with a new album called Serve to Serve Again, which I've been listening to heaps. There's a song on there called Just My Luck, which I've heard about 30 times this week. It was probably not. I'm exaggerating. I don't tend to listen to songs over and over anyway. Even the ones I very much like, I just find that kind of kills them anyway. But there's a couple other albums that I've got which I haven't listened to yet. There's a new one by LA Witch, who is sort of a stompy garage rock type band, doing kind of droney thing. How would I call it? Sort of a sort of darkened version of that kind of surf garage LA type of sound. And then also there's a band called Bent Arcana, which is a combination project involving John Dwyer at the center, and John Dwyer is the head of the OCs, the main man there. So this is just kind of like he just got a bunch of mates together, they jammed for a few days, and this album is the result of that. So I'm expecting something very expensive, something very we'll throw that avant-garde word out there again. I think it's probably the kind of thing where you just cut loose and explore your wilder ideas and see what happens. So always interested to hear something like that. There's probably that's more or less where I'm at on the musical front, I'd say.
Shout out to Timata, which is on the western coast of the Coromandel Peninsula, just a bit north of Thames and Kopu, so not too far from the Okalangi. I'll just roll through some UFC and Lydia Co, and then we'll open it up with the CPL and Stephen Adams. So we know Israel Adesanya is fighting Paulo Costa in a middleweight title fight. That is happening September 26th. But now we've got a full card, and we have Kai Kara France. He's fighting Brandon Royale. We also have Shane Young. He is fighting Nate Landwehr. And Brad Riddell is fighting Alex da Silva Coelho. So we have 4 city kickboxing fighters all on the same card. And it's Shane Young's been out of action for a while, so it's a major return for him. Brad Riddell is on the come up. I think he's the second fight on this whole card, which is a bit rough to Brad Riddell, because I view him as the most exciting city kickboxing fighter beneath Israel Adesanya. So keep an eye on Brad Riddell very early on in that card, and then Kai Kara-France. I think he's coming off a loss, if my memory serves me correctly. Oh, no, a win? I don't know. But they're all there, and the week of that fight card, there'll be plenty of preview information, so stay tuned for that stuff. And also, I'd add, there's been a couple of interview things with Israel Adesanya and Paulo Costa together, and if you're interested in just rabid shit-talking between 2 aggressive fighters,
yes, please
tune into that stuff, because it's going to be entertaining, but it's also it's just, I don't know why you'd want to watch it, Wildcat. I don't have any juice in watching that kind of niggle. And, obviously it's good to sell the fight. It's going to get a lot of people tuned in, because Israel Adesanya and Paulo Costa genuinely don't really like each other. But there's a lot of videos on YouTube that are going to be involved. You're not going to get so much fight discussion. You're going to get niggle between Adesanya and Paulo Costa that is just kind of hype related. So just keep that in mind moving forward. Lydia Ko had a good result, actually, in the Women's Open over in Scotland. Tied for 14th. She shot 4 rounds over 70, 1 round even par, and then a couple of +1s and a couple of and 1 +2. So that's good in the context of Lydia Ko having 3 top 20 finishes in a row. And I'm pretty happy with that. She finished tied for 14th in the Women's Open. Going back to the Scottish Open week before, she was tied for 12th, and then the Marathon LPGA Classic where she got that tied for 2nd. So 3 top 20 finishes in a row for Lydia Ko. That's impressive. That's consistency, and that's what we want to see with Lydia Ko. One more thing on the LPGA Tour. We've had this narrative that the LPGA Tour is growing, and it's much stronger than when Lydia Ko first jumped into the LPGA Tour. I'm just looking at the Race to CME Globe season rankings, which are like a LPGA season year rankings based on wins and points and stuff like that. A bit different to the Rolex World Rankings for anyone who gives a shit. I'm looking at the top 11. And there are 9 different countries represented in the top 11. So starting at number 1, we got USA. Number 2, South Korea. Number 3, Australia. Number 4, Japan. Number 5, France. 6, USA. 7, Sweden. 8th, Thailand. 9th, South Korea. 10th, England. 11th, Mexico. So if you're wondering about the LPGA Tour and where Lydia Ko fits into that, LPGA Tour has undergone immense growth in terms of quality and the amount of female players around the world. And in that top 11, you have 9 different nations represented, which shows the breadth and width of women's golf. And the LPGA Tour, Lydia Ko is ranked 14th, which is a product of consistently finishing in the top 20, which is a beautiful thing. And we've just watched Steven Adams in the NBA playoffs for Oklahoma City Thunder. They had a good win over the Houston Rockets wildcard. Talk us through your observations, primarily, as we alluded to last week. Where does Steven Adams fit in to this series? And from that context, how well is he doing?
Yeah, it almost so fast, eh? Like a week ago, we were talking about the like just prospecting pre-series, how his role might go and how it could be like kind of a little bit of like it could go 100 miles an hour in one direction or the complete opposite direction. It sort of worked out like both in a funny way. Like it's been a little bit of a strange one for him. The first couple games they lost, and he played relatively prominent roles, getting a lot of rebounds. The first game, I think he had about 17 points or something like that. But after that, hasn't really been so much of a factor in the scoring, and it's one of those things. It's always a little hard to assess Steven Adams in that way because he's not like the go-to guy. You can look at James Harden and say, here's how James Harden wants to get his points, here's what he's doing, here's what OKC is doing to stop him, and it's all very like direct and immediate. With Steven Adams, he's like 3 or 4 steps down the pecking order, so there's just a lot of flow-on effects that don't necessarily have anything to do with him. The third game, which OKC won and got themselves back into the series, and then just won game 4 to tie it up at 2 apiece. That third game, he sort of late in the fourth quarter, he went diving out of bounds to try to save a ball, which he ended up leaving, and it was OKC's ball anyway. And he didn't come back into the game after that. He went off to get checked, and then they didn't seem to, like, he got cleared to return, but by the time he was cleared to return, James Harden had fouled out in overtime, and OKC were just running away with it. So they went with this sort of smaller ball lineup with Gallinari playing at the 5 and Lou Dort, and then 3-point guards beyond that. And it was sort of, it's not quite the Golden State Warriors death lineup of yore, but it's the closest thing OKC can have to being able to run Houston around, because Houston otherwise have played extremely well in this series defensively, particularly in the first 2 games, where they're just like, it's tricky for Steven Adams, for example. Like when he's out there on the court, he's often guarding PJ Tucker, who's about 5 inches shorter than him, if not more than that, and who likes to spot up in the corner because he's this absolute knockdown jump shooter from the corner. So that's stretching Adams away. If Adams leaves his man, he's got a wide open 3. But then also, if he doesn't leave his man, there's probably going to be a easy path to the basket because there's no one there protecting the rim, kind of thing. So he gets moved around a lot like that, and it's been very tricky for him defensively, which is why we need to see him being a dominant offensive player in order to like stay on the court. So when OKC did real well without him late in that third game, it kind of, I wouldn't say writing on the wall, because obviously he was still going to be in the starting lineup. He's still going to have a lot to say in terms of like setting the tone in games. But I will say I wasn't surprised in this game 4 when he wasn't out there for the last sort of 4 or 5 minutes of the game. Crunch time, they went back to that sort of closing lineup with well, I'd say 5 shooters on the floor, but Lou Dort's a little bit up and down. He's still a rookie. Hell of a defensive player, eh? Like, this dude's come a little bit out of nowhere. He was playing, he was an undrafted free agent, and he was playing a lot of G League on a 2-way contract, I'm pretty sure, at the start of this season, which, to be fair, the start of this season feels like about 5 years ago, so that's kind of where it stands in terms of the rotation. But I will say, after a pretty poor game by his standards in Game 3, Steven Adams probably had his best game of the series in this Game 4, even though it comes with, I think he only played 26 minutes, so a drop in minutes. He did actually get his points up. He hit a few free throws, which is always nice. Getting a couple of those putbacks as well, attacking those misses for OKC. And there's a few ways to look at it. You want to see him out there on the court in crunch time, but you also just want to see OKC winning games and hopefully advancing, and everything changes with a different matchup. I haven't actually looked at the bracket because I never really thought they had much of a chance in this series. But they've got themselves back into it. Whether they can sustain that, because Houston missed a lot of 3-pointers down the stretch in that Game 4, and they really kind of let that one go. It was kind of a weird close to the game because it wasn't the big dramatic finish. It was sort of like, felt like Houston should be able to pull away, and they never did, and so OKC just kind of held on. Like, it didn't even have to push it clear. It was just A strange one for them. But I think that's probably going to be, as far as Steven Adams specifically goes, I think that's probably going to be the way forward. He's not a role player. He's bigger than a role player, but perhaps we won't see him so much in crunch time against these Rockets, where the Rockets are going to look to exploit him in a few different ways. Specifically, if they can get him switched onto someone like James Harden or one of their guards. Eric Gordon's had success as well doing this, where they can just attack him for speed and he can't keep up. So it's all a matter, I mean, it's the playoffs, right? It's all a matter of just adjusting to what you see in front of you and doing the best with your opportunities. And this version of Steven Adams in Game 4 was probably the best version, because OKC looked pretty good when they can play with that smaller lineup, but they also, in the 26-odd minutes that Adams was out there, particularly, a lot of good stuff early in the game and early in the second half as well, like starting the halves well. And he was pretty good at both ends too. He held his own defensively a couple times. I think there was at least one decent little like reach and block, and he was rebounding well and actually putting up a few points as well, getting to the line and making some free throws, like those kind of things. You make the most of your minutes. That's what the team wants. Like, that's what the coach is asking of you. So, in a funny way, like, he had a lesser role in Game 4, but I also thought it was probably his best game of the series so far.
The Oklahoma City Thunder, not to get ahead of ourselves here, Wildcard, but they're on the same side as the Lakers and Portland. So, either way, that's going to, like, any matchup's going to be reasonably difficult. But if we're forecasting forward, if they do manage to get past the Rockets, LA have plenty of big men, Anthony Davis, JaVale McGee, Dwight Howard. Portland have lots of big men, Hassan Whiteside and Nurkic, whatever that joker's name is. So it's not like this series is going to be the definitive for Steven Adams moving forward, as you alluded to there. It's all matchup based. There's also, like, watching Oklahoma City Thunder, you've got Dennis Schroeder, Chris Paul, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, like, all on the court together. It's a weird little combination that, like, Houston have gone small, but Oklahoma City Thunder have some pieces in their guard group that can do a good job going small as well. So if you're a basketball head, there's plenty in this series, plenty of little bits and pieces, rotations, matchups, stylistic elements, and stuff like that to sink your teeth into, which all in some way, shape, or form, I wouldn't say revolves around Steven Adams, but it is at the very least connected to Steven Adams. So it's a beautiful thing, that little Oklahoma City Thunder versus Houston Rockets series. And if you're in Aotearoa, you're watching this game and you're thinking, fuck the Houston Rockets. We want to see Oklahoma City Thunder win. So rally behind the Thunder, please, Aotearoa. Not sure about you, Wildcard. I definitely was not predicting that the best bowler in the Caribbean Premier League after 3 to 4 games would be Scott Kugelheim. And that's exactly what's happened.
Nope, wasn't expecting that either.
Northern District's seamer, or sometimes all-rounder. He is leading all Caribbean Premier League wicket takers. He's got 10 wickets at an average of 12.7, RPO of 8.37, which is the most expensive economy rate of the top 5 wicket takers in the Caribbean Premier League, but he's taken wickets in every single game, and he's doing a good job. Part of this, I believe, may be because of his somewhat unique style of bowling, just in the sense of he's quicker than you think, he delivers a heavy ball, he's got some good variations, and I reckon if you haven't faced Kugelheim before, he might surprise you. And so I say that to project that I'm very interested in how Kugelheim moves through the next stanza of CPL cricket over the next few days, and whether he can maintain that kind of impact for St. Lucia. Then on the batting side of things, we have Colin Munro and Glenn Phillips. They're both in the top 5 run scorers. Colin Munro is 3rd, Glenn Phillips is 5th, and fairly similar stats. They're both striking between, Glenn Phillips is striking at 130, Colin Munro is striking at 139, and it's all as per, considering Munro and Phillips have been in the CPL before. They've been in the top 5 run scorers in the CPL before, and that's just common territory. Those are the main highlights of the CPL. Ross Taylor's doing okay, bit up and down. And Ross Taylor's actually got, how about this wild card? I think I counted 23 batsmen have over 50 runs. And Ross Taylor's got the lowest strike rate of those 23 batsmen. He's striking at 84, and he's the only batsman of those 23 batsmen with 50 plus runs who is striking below 90. So obviously we're not going to be too concerned about CPL, but definitely no reason to be concerned there with Ross Taylor, because Ross Taylor's, and I've seen this with Colin Munro wildcard. Colin Munro, he takes like 10 balls just to do nothing. And that's cool for Colin Munro, because I think it puts Colin Munro, it just suits Colin Munro. Colin Munro's devised a system in T20 cricket where he wants to take his time at the start, and he can build up, and he's finished all of these games with a really good strike rate. But that comes later on in his innings, so he takes his time. Ross Taylor, it's a similar instance, because Ross Taylor's skill is in the middle order, getting to the crease, assessing conditions, assessing the game situation, and batting accordingly. And I think Ross Taylor just hasn't got over that hump of taking your time at the start of the innings and cashing in later on. He hasn't got that far in the innings. So the reason I'm all good about it is because Ross Taylor's done that for years now with the Blackcaps T20 international team, and he just needs to find his groove.
Whereabouts in the batting order is he coming in? Because, I mean, the recent times where he's had a little bit of a resurgence, really, same as even he's had resurgences in all 3 formats and over the last sort of 4 years, which in itself is just amazing to think about. That almost gives me an idea for an article. Maybe I should do that. But with the 2020 stuff, he's been coming in as a little bit more of like a closer for the Blackcaps. So I would imagine as an import player in the Caribbean Premier League, you'd probably be seeing him batting more like 3 or 4 or something. Would I is that a factor as well? Like he's just coming in earlier in the innings and having to bat for a little longer, therefore being more patient? Or maybe it's just the Caribbean Premier League and he's caught that laid-back vibe on.
There are I've had some ideas. I've actually had a lot of ideas about the CPL because there's some interesting things that I might touch on. But it may, because a lot of these players had pretty weird preparations, you got a quarantine coming from different countries. It was a messy preparation. So I don't want to hold anyone too, I don't want to be too critical of players, especially some of these Kiwi players, because I've got a couple at the other end of this spectrum who haven't played so well, but you don't want to be too critical given the wider situation. Ross Taylor's been batting number 4. Guyana do have Shimron Hetmeyer, who is a West Indian international. He's leading all run scorers, and he's striking at 150, and he's the only player in the top 5 with a strike rate over 140. So they've got a bit of firepower there. But obviously, Ross Taylor batting in the CPL, with the Blackcaps, you've got Colin Munro, you've got Colin de Grandhomme, you've got Martin Guptill. I think what the Blackcaps T20 team do is they come in with the firepower up top, and then Ross Taylor comes in later on, which is why you see him drop down the order. He might be listed to come in at number 5, but often, sometimes for the Blackcaps, Ross Taylor's the slider who moves up and down the order depending on on the game situation. The Blackcaps can do that because they've got some severe hitting prowess at the top of their order, especially more recently with Colin de Grandhomme moving to that number 4 position in T20 cricket, whereas Guyana and the CPL don't have that firepower. Ross Taylor's just locked in at number 4. But it's still a good spot because he's going to come in, he's going to either save the innings, he's going to take his time during the middle stages, he can hit from ball 1 as well. So he's got all the tools to be effective regardless. But he is batting number 4 also on that line of thinking. Colin Munro's been batting number 3 for Trinbago. I'm not sure if you've seen Trinbago play, but they have Sunil Narayan at the top of the order. They have, there's someone else at the top of the order. I can't think off the top of my head. I'll do a little search for it. They have Darren Bravo coming in. Lendl Simmons and Sunil Narayan are your openers for Trinbago, both West Indian internationals, both experienced T20 franchise batsmen. Kyron Pollard, Dwayne Bravo, Tim Seifert. Tim Seifert's batted once in 3 games because of that Trinbago batting lineup, and Colin Munro's part of it. Colin Munro's the best of it. So shout out to Colin Munro doing some good things. I did mention the other end of the spectrum wildcard, and like Mitchell Santner's been solid. Shout out to him. Glenn Phillips, as I alluded to before, been pretty good. Corey Anderson, he's had scores of 0, 2, and 2. Now, I find that fascinating because earlier this year I wrote about the decline of Corey Anderson. So I'm not going to get too dramatic here. I'm just throwing it up. You can come to your own conclusions about Corey Anderson from that, and maybe we'll see how he goes throughout the remainder of the tournament. And then a weird one, Ish Sodhi. St. Kitts and Nevis have not won a game. They're 0-3. Ish Sodhi has 1 wicket at an average of 99. So he's struggling a wee bit with St. Kitts and Nevis. Nick Kelly's also part of the St. Kitts team. Otago Volt's batsman. He's only played 1 game though. He's kind of second tier with the St. Kitts team.
What's Ish Sodhi's RPO look like in that? Because, first of all, I'd imagine it's not good regardless because they're losing games. But also, if you're not taking wickets, at least you can, the RPO is sometimes the better indication. But, yeah, I also, without hearing the answer yet, I imagine it's not great if they're getting beaten comfortably.
It's all 9s. He's got an average of 99 and he's got an RPO of 9. So 9s across the board for Ish Sodhi. And I threw it up in the update that I wrote this morning. A lot of the best T20 bowlers wildcard are Minnow Nation players. There's a dude, Mujib-ur-Rahman. He is 3rd in wickets. Average of 9.3, RPO of 4.6. He's from Afghanistan. There is this Lamashane guy. He is Sandeep Lamashane. He's from Nepal. He's got 4 wickets at 15. And then you've got Rashid Khan. Now, Lamashane is 20 years old. Rashid Khan is 20 years old. And Mujib-ur-Rahman from Afghanistan, he's 19 years old. So this is just something I'm keeping an eye on over the course of this tournament because you've got Ish Sodhi and Mitchell Santner, who there was a World T20 tournament, maybe 2016, 17, I think it was, where Ish Sodhi and Mitchell Santner were amazing. But over the last few years, they've both been good for the Blackcaps, and that's cool. But the vibe around the world has shifted. So you've had Rashid Khan taking over the BBL. Blackcaps can't play in the BBL. Lamashane's been playing BBL. Blackcaps can't play in the BBL. And now you've got these younger Minnow Nation spinners who are, in T20 cricket at least, among the best in the world. And they're the blokes in demand for T20 franchises. So I'm just keeping an eye on this. I'm just keeping an eye on where Mitchell Santner and Ish Sodhi are, because they're both 27 and 28 years old, playing for New Zealand. And then I'm keeping an eye on where Mujib-ur-Rahman, Sandeep Lamashane and Rashid Khan are going, how they're going in the CPL, because they're 19, 20 years old, and they're also from Afghanistan and Nepal. Very interesting little narrative to keep tapped in throughout the CPL.
Yeah, old mate Rashid Khan's got a. I mean, I remember when he was in there must have been last year's BBLA. Like Shane Warne was just clinging to his hip the whole time. Like you'd get these little like leg spinning masterclasses where the two of them would be there, and like pre-game coverage or whatever, and which I actually quite like, because when Shane Warne talks about leg spinning, he's amazing. When Shane Warne talks about anything else, which usually involves him talking about himself, he's not so great a broadcaster. So maybe Rashid Khan's also, as well as being one of the very best bowlers in 2020 cricket at the moment, might also be playing a little bit of a tanking role there and keeping Shane Warne on target. Anyway, anything else in the old CPL, or should we move into Welly Nicks?
Hit us up with some Welly Nicks here, wildcard, because I watched a bit of that game, and I was watching a Wellington Phoenix team that looked pretty good. Crisp passing, good possession, couple probing balls, couple chances created. Then Perth slip a goal in, and it just felt like one of those footy games where one team is, in theory, in control of the game. They're playing the best footy. They're doing well. And then I come back a day or two later, I check the stats. Wellington Phoenix, 67% possession. Aerial duels 1. No, that's a stupid one. What am I looking at?
Shot totals is pretty good.
Corners, 10-9. Passes, triple. Passing accuracy, 83%. Crosses, 35-18. It's all there. It's all there for a win. It's all there. Wellington Phoenix playing good footy. And they lose. Season's over. Let's start with this game specifically, wildcard. Talk us through how you felt the Wellington Phoenix played in this game, and then we'll get into like a season wrap-up of the Wellington Phoenix in a disjointed A-League, obviously impacted by the shitstorm that is 2020.
Yeah, have you got the shot numbers with you as well on the stat list?
Oh, let me just look at it. 31-15. Shots on target, 11-5.
Yep. Yeah, there's your indication of the game pretty much right there. Like, take all those stats together and trust that this wasn't one of those occasions where the stats are a little misleading. Like, sometimes a team has a lot of shots because they just have a lot of block shots or whatever, and it's not really like threatening the goal so much. It's not really like clear opportunities, and sometimes possession is just passing around the back line and not really playing aggressively and looking to score a bunch of goals. On this occasion, all of those stats were entirely accurate reflections of the game. Like, the Phoenix, had a couple vulnerable moments for sure, and they conceded what was a pretty decent goal from Perth, like a well-worked goal, well taken, good run, good strike, all those things. Couldn't really blame anyone. It wasn't an error or anything. It's just, finals football. Sometimes a team just takes a chance. Like, you get there wasn't their only chance of the game, but it was the one they took as the one that counted. And the Phoenix just, for all their promising football and for all the like aggressive, really positive flowing stuff that they were creating, like just the same thing we've seen from them ever since the restart. And it is not just since the restart. Like, it is if you look at all their results throughout the season, this has been just like a wider trend. I think they've scored, what have they played? 27 games in total. They've scored 3 goals once, twice, 3 times out of 27 games. Like, it's the team that finished third on the ladder. They only 3 times scored more than 2 in a game. They kept a few clean sheets, but not a lot. Like, generally, they were winning. I think a 2-1 win was their most common result of the season. Like, this is what we saw from them throughout the season. They're a team that is going to probably concede a spare goal, but they're going to score just enough to win it. But they're not going to score a lot more than that. Like, a lot of close finishes because of that. And then, just for whatever reason, they lost a little bit of that. Well, they lost all of that momentum. They had won 4 games in a row coming into when the pandemic hit, the league got postponed. They're on their best run of form of the season. Come out of it with their worst run of form in the season. And it's not a coincidence. They had to go through a lot of tough things. They had to do the whole quarantine, 9 weeks away. Fatigue with the short turnarounds between games and all that. And they had injuries, and Gary Hooper wasn't there for this elimination game. He was out injured, and there goes your top scorer and the only really positive finisher in the squad. And what they were left with was what we saw, a team that played really well, good build-up football, and just couldn't put the ball in the back of the net. Same problem they've had, and I think they scored 2 goals in their last 5 games, which they didn't win any of them. Obviously, they wouldn't if you're not scoring any goals. And that was... It's not like the writing was on the wall so much. That's the wrong phrase to use, but we saw all the clues that this was their, we knew coming into this game, this was their big problem. Could they overcome this issue of being able to put their chances away? If yes, then they'd advance. If no, then they're probably going to struggle. And it was a no, and they struggled, and they lost. That's kind of what happens when you come into, knockout football. You can't really afford to have that one glaring mistake, that one glaring weakness, because the other team, especially against a team like Perth, who have a lot of veterans, weird mix for them, because they've got a lot of experienced veterans in their team, and also a lot of really inexperienced young fellas, just because they lost a lot of their imports, and they were definitely weakened. I think full strength Perth with Diego Castro, and then what's his name, German fella at the back, and all that. Would have been a much more difficult prospect, as it was. They won anyway, so couldn't really even worry about that. But yeah, just the Phoenix had that glaring weakness against a team that has experience at this level before. The Phoenix, very little playoff experience, very young team themselves. Tony Popovich coaching the Perth Glory, he knows exactly what he's doing. Ufuk Talai, as good as he has been as a coach tactically this season, his first as a head coach at A-League level, was the second best on the night from a coaching perspective as well. And you just add all these things together, and there are a lot of little reasons which become a big reason when it's all combined, and just frustrating because we know the Phoenix are capable of more, but at the same time it did become clear throughout that game that as much as they should have scored a goal, they should have advanced, they didn't, and therefore they didn't, and they didn't because they just didn't quite have they just weren't quite there, at the level. They didn't quite have the well-rounded squad. They needed just that one extra piece to take them over the top, and just writing about it afterwards. And I looked to make a point about the inexperience and the changeover, and just how far ahead of the curve the Phoenix are to have made it to this point anyway, at this early stage of what was effectively their third rebuild in 3 years because of a new coach and a lot of another new coach and another big off season of squad upheaval, which thankfully won't be the case on either of those fronts going into next season. They're just they were that far ahead of the curve anyway when you take that perspective, but we shift our perspectives when teams start winning. We expect them to keep winning, and they were good enough to have won this game. And trying to make a point about the different squads and just how much of a changeover there had been. There was one name that stuck out from the finals game a year ago. I was going to say this time a year ago. It wasn't this time, but it was a year ago. If Roy Krishna was in the team that played Perth, the Phoenix would have won. And that's kind of where it starts and stops. They just... and Gary Hooper was out injured, so maybe he could have had that Roy Krishna sort of impact, but Gary Hooper's been struggling for fitness throughout the large portion, a majority of the time that he's been with the Phoenix, so it's not quite the same thing. So when you think about it, if Krishna was there, they would have won. Yes, that's true, which therefore that's the focus of your off-season now, I think, is you got to think, okay, how can we find someone who can have a Roy Krishna impact? Because if that's the difference between us winning games and making a run in the finals and not, then, well, that's the thing we have to figure out before next season. So, yeah, there's the script for Ruffy coming into the what is, I don't know how long the off season is going to be. No one's really sure about any of these things. They're all kind of moving goalposts, but that's the script. Is how can they, like, okay, they didn't make the most of what they could have done this season. They still achieved a lot of great things. They had a very good season on the whole. Wasn't what it could have been though, so how do we turn this into success next season? And I think that's where it starts for them, is they just gotta get some better finishes in their team, to be honest. And yeah, the transfer market is how you do that, so we'll see what happens.
I believe we're going to be in for a lot of change in the group of New Zealand teams competing in Australian leagues. So I don't want to, like, the Breakers building something. New Zealand Warriors are undergoing immense change and stuff like that. But right now it just feels like the Wellington Phoenix are I just feel good about the Wellington Phoenix in the sense that whether it's the lockdown, COVID pandemic situation, but I think more poignantly it is the lack of consistency season to season over the past 3 to 4 years, and yet the Wellington Phoenix are still there. They're still a good team. They're still a good organization. No matter the changes that have happened between Rudan and Talai and the amount of players coming in, and then, as you alluded to, like, having to do regular rebuilds, like, that's not normal. That is not the blueprint on building a successful sporting franchise. That is something you do, unless you're the Warriors, at least every 5 years. The Warriors, unlike the Phoenix, the Warriors have had to do more frequent rebuilds over a far longer period of time, but it's been more concentrated for the Phoenix over the last 3 to 4 years. The amount of pivoting and rebuilding that they've had to do, I'm amazed that they are there. They're there as a A-League, not a force, but they're just simmering there. And if you're a Phoenix fan, you got to be excited just for shit to settle down and to come into the next season with the bulk of your squad returning, with the same fucking coach returning, with some giving the younger group another season to develop. Like, yeah, sure, you're going to have Liberto Kakache leaving, probably, likely, definitely. You're going to have some other international players who might move on and so on and so forth, as is the case with every sport every season. But it's kind of like going from, an 8 out of 10 frantic, hectic, holy shit change and just drawing it back to a 5 out of 10. Because all the seeds have been planted, through the changes, I reckon the foundations for a good, solid organization and footballing team department, those foundations are rock solid. And I think that's very exciting, considering we're coming from like a Phoenix history that has been very up and down, similar to the Warriors. Not quite to that extent. Shout out to all you Phoenix fans. I'm not saying you're like the Warriors, but you're almost there, and it's been torturous for Kiwi sports fans. However, promising signs. There's excitement. There's young players coming through. There's a pipeline of talent within Aotearoa to the Phoenix first team. And they just seem like through all the mayhem, the turbulence, they've come out better for it on the other side. Is that overly optimistic, Wildcard, or is that an accurate assessment?
No, I think that's dead on, to be honest. I mean, like, there was a point, and it might only have been as recent as 2 years ago, where we'd have been sitting here on this podcast saying there's no reason why the Wellington Phoenix should get off lightly compared to the criticism the Warriors get, because this is the same thing that we're looking at. Like, the Phoenix were a team that didn't seem to have a lot of direction, didn't seem to be able to find a comfortable head coach, didn't seem to be able to win consistently away from home in particular, didn't seem to be able to retain their best players. Like, just a lot of, it's like looking in a mirror almost. But things changed with Mark Rudan, to be honest. And Mark Rudan didn't last, but in comes Talai, and he's done an even better job than Rudan did. And a better job, like an even better job on the season versus season, but like significantly better job when you consider that this is clearly the start of something as well. Not just a one and done season, but this is Uthi building something. And you look at that starting 11 from the game against Perth. So Stefan Marinovic in goal, still under contract, starting goalkeeper for the All Whites, like excellent. Backline of Callan Elliott, Stephen Taylor, Tiarafai Hudson-Wihongi, and Libby Kikache. Taylor, captain of the club, outstanding player, still under contract. In fact, under contract for a couple more years, I think. He signed a 2-year extension earlier this season. Callan Elliott and Tiarafai Hudson-Wihongi were not starters in these roles in fact, both of them had hardly even played games pre-restart, but both had been like two, honestly, like close to breakout players of the restart. Elliott in particular. I thought Elliott got better every game he played. And really like nudged Louis Fenton, not just out of the starting lineup, but out of the matchday squad altogether for the last few games. Both of those two guys are off contract, and I think the first thing you do, because it's the easiest thing, is just, here you go, give them at least 1-year deals, if not 2 or 3-year deals. Just sign them both up. They both played really well. They're both players who will continue to grow and get better as well. And players who weren't even playing in these positions up until not that long ago, as well. Elliott at right back, Hudson-Wihongi at centre back. Like, they're converted players, so that's also not a criticism. That's just stating a fact to say their scope for improvement from this point is pretty high, because they've got to this point relatively quickly as well. So there's that. Like, those two guys are off contract, but they should be pretty easy to retain and pretty like no-brainers to retain as well, given what we've seen over the last month or so from them. Libby Kikache is going, we know that, and replacing him at left back is a big deal. But then into the midfield, Matty Steinman is off contract. Could they retain him? I don't know. Would they want to? They might want to do something else with that import spot and say Alex Rufer and Cam Devlin, they're our midfielders moving forward, because I don't think you lose a whole lot. You lose a little bit. You lose Steinman's excellent positioning and the way he reads the game, but you also get Rufer with that extra attacking thrust, which is something they probably need. I think just would be a little bit better balance, considering that their attacking midfielders aren't supplying a whole lot of goals. But yeah, Steinman is off contract, but Devlin is under contract. Reno Piscopo and Ulysses Davia, Josh Soturio, David Ball, they were your front four. All 4 of them are coming back next season as well. So there's, like, considering that when Talai took over, he had 6 or 7 players under contract, something like that. So like something completely silly. Something, to be honest, kind of inexcusable from a club to ever get to that point, let alone to do it 2 seasons in a row as well. But now we've got all this continuity building forward. We've seen like flashes of what they're capable of. They should, like, a lot of young players. Devlin's going to be better for this experience. Piscopo's going to be better. Elliott and Hudson-Wihongi, etc. Like, there's, not to mention someone like Ben Wayne and Sam Sutton, those 2 guys coming out of the academy as well. I think Sutton is off contract. I don't know what the deal is with how you retain academy players. Ben Wayne is moving up next season to a full roster status. Like, there's just a lot of young players who are going to be better and who are going to, like, just naturally develop into stronger players, especially for this experience, not to mention the playoff experience, not to mention the motivational aspect of losing a tough game like that. There's zero reason why they should be any worse than what they were this year, next season. I mean, other teams will improve. That's the factor that you can't control. But the Phoenix, there's nothing there to tell you that they're going to be any worse than they are. So they should be able to, if that's your bench line, is to be able to repeat your best ever league finish and hope to actually win a playoff game next time, you're doing all right. Like, those are foundations for success right there. You're not going to get any worse. You're only going to get better. And if you get the right couple players, with the relatively few free spots in their squad that they're going to have available for signings, you sign the right couple guys as well, just to add that little bit extra, then they should be better. Like, we should be expecting them to be even more competitive as well. So absolutely nothing to worry about on that front. And it's one of those things, like, it sucks when your team loses a playoff game that you thought they were going to win. Like, that's awful. It's just a terrible feeling. And knowing that that's the end of the season, like, that's it, done. You got to wait till next time. You got to go through the whole round robin to get to that one playoff game. You lose that one playoff game, and that's it. Like, you got to go through a whole nother season to get to another one. That's a terrible feeling. But it's a worse feeling when it feels like it's a one-off. Like, this is your only opportunity. This is a team that can't be consistently trusted to get to this level. Therefore, one defeat is a disaster. If we get to next season with the squad we expect them to be, and they're as competitive as we expect them to be, they make a few improvements, sort of thing, there's no reason they can't build off that to be here most years. Like, and if that's the case, then the 1 year where you lose, we're having 31 shots, 11 of them on target, and you somehow still lose 1-0, like, that's more bearable if you feel like next year you can come back and do it better. If it feels like it's a one-off and this is your only opportunity, that's where it becomes, like, disastrous. And up until this point, the Phoenix, for most of the last decade, have been that team. Like, you get to the finals, you lose like this, it's a disaster because this was the chance. Like, this was the year when it all clicked. But they have the foundations to be able to repeat this and keep coming back and keep, like, you make 3 or 4 finals in a row, you're going to go on a run one of those years. You're going to be challenging for a championship in one of those years at least, you know? And that's kind of the perspective we got to keep with the Phoenix, I think, because, to be honest, the evidence is all there that they can be that team.
I am reasonably excited to see the Aotearoa Kiwis play a game of rugby league. And
so am I.
I would chuck up how excited are you to watch the All Whites play a game of football?
They actually have one scheduled against Belgium in 4 or 5 weeks or something like that. I don't know if it's going to be the full squad. Like, it sounds like they might just, because of travel reasons, they might just pick European-based players. But still, that would mean a chance to see, if everyone does turn up based in Europe, Joe Bell, Sarpreet Singh, Ryan Thomas, Chris Wood, Libby Kikache by that point as well. Like, you're going to see most of the best players if that does happen. So yeah, absolutely fizzed, especially to see them playing against a team that could include, like, Kevin De Bruyne, Romelu Lukaku, etc.
Yeah, whenever they're going to play, holy shit! Like this is the landscape of Kiwi sport, where it's just like, I just want to see these national teams in action somehow, some way, whenever it's meant to be. Take us around the World Wildcard with the Flying Kiwis, where, yeah, as alluded to at the start, Winston Reid has come out of nowhere and he's playing for Kansas City. What'd you make of old Winnie Reid in the MLS? And do you know how many players from Aotearoa are in the MLS off the top of your head?
In the MLS currently it's a little bit tricky because there's a couple who are contracted in the MLS but are playing for lower league teams. So it's about the guys who play regularly, Michael Boxall, Bill Tuiloma, Elliot Collier comes off the bench most games for Chicago, and James Moose is on the bench pretty much every week for Minnesota as well. Hopefully Winston Reid's going to be in that. He should be, because his coach was absolutely raving about him. He said he was tremendous in his first game, even though he was apparently tiring, as you would be after, as I'll get to that in a sec, just how long he's been on the sidelines. So that's, where have we got the list here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 players contracted, about 5 of them who play regularly. Noah Billingsley's on loan. In the USL, Kyle Adams isn't on loan, but he's been sort of designated to the USL more often than not. And Declan Wynn, we don't see a lot of him for Colorado either. But eight players contracted in the MLS at the moment, which I'm sure is a record, but I haven't built up my my database to the point where I can say that for certain. But it's got to be like already just having 5 Kiwis take the field this season is a whole lot.
That's how I feel about the 11 Kiwi NRL debutants as well. It feels like most ever, but who knows? What did you make of Winston Reid? How'd you feel about his return to the professional football field?
Well, it's pretty amazing when you consider his previous club game was on the 3rd of March 2018. He played for West Ham against Swansea. West Ham lost 4-1. Winston Reid went off injured in the first half. He went off initially with a concussion, but he was concussed when he hit the ground. It was one of them collisions, sort of scrambling to defend his goal line. And it wasn't the concussion that did him, though. As he fell, he also busted his knee. So it was a kind of double whammy of an injury, like really bad injury. And he was out for the rest of that season. That was the 2017-18 season. Missed the rest of that season, comes back in pre-season, but has a setback, has to have surgery again. Misses effectively the entire rest of the next season as well. Comes back before the most recent season that was just concluded and plays a few games for West Ham in pre-season, at the start, particularly when they were on tour. Then as they sort of wind down towards their starting 11, he plays less and less, and it's not really confirmed if he's injured again or what's going on, and he just kind of disappears into the background, and we don't hear a lot from him. He's not a guy who talks much anyway. He does come back and play 45 minutes for the All Whites against Ireland. He then plays after, a week later, he plays about 70 minutes for West Ham's academy team. And then he disappears again for another couple months. And then around sort of January, February, he gets on a couple benches for West Ham, but doesn't actually get on the field. Around that time, Manuel Pellegrini gets sacked and David Moyes comes in. Winston Reid and David Moyes have a little bit of a chat. They decide that Reid is, with West Ham, potentially in a bit of a relegation battle, which they ended up getting away with. Not comfortably, but comfortably enough compared to the crisis that relegation is in the English Premier League. They decide he's not to be trusted in that such high stakes battle when he hasn't played for so long. So they figure we'll try to get you a loan somewhere else. He goes on loan to Sporting Kansas City. Then he's got to get a visa, which takes a while. He misses the first couple games. Then a global pandemic comes along and he misses some more time there. Then he travels with the squad to the Orlando tournament, but he's on the bench for all of their games, doesn't play in any of them. I think they're sort of trusting, trying to get him back up and going. They then have a couple of weeks off between that and the resumption of the actual MLS season. And then finally then is the 21st of August. That's when Winston Reid finally makes his comeback, which is, add them up, tally them all together, that's 902 days in between competitive club appearances for Winston Reid, which is, we're talking about what the All White squad has cut, some of the players that are coming through in this exciting sort of generation of players and this flow, and in multiple sports as well, that we often have as a theme of this podcast. Consider where those things were in the 3rd of March 2018 and where they are now, and that's how long Winston Reid's been out of club top competitive regular football, is kind of crazy to think about. And that makes him a kind of interesting little contrast, because while we've got this really exciting young generation, we've also got someone like Winston Reid making a little bit of a return as now very much the elder statesman, the guy who paved the way in a lot of these areas, and that's pretty awesome to see as well. It's great, and Winston Reid is easily good enough for MLS level. He's still, from the one game I've seen of him here when he wasn't even fully fit, from the 45 minutes for the All Whites against Ireland, he's comfortably good enough for this level. Whether he could play in and out, week in, week out, at the Premier League level still, you'd need to back up the old fitness a little further before you could make any kind of judgment on that. Don't know if he's lost a step or if he'll have injuries, setbacks again. He's been an injury-prone player anyway throughout his career. So not going to make any calls in that one, but he's certainly good enough to be a dominant player at MLS level, and hopefully he will be for the rest of this year and potentially beyond. We don't know quite what the deal is with with his transfer status, because he does have a big hefty contract which he'd probably want to see through the end, and keep cashing them checks from West Ham, but they also don't really want to keep paying them checks, so it's a little bit of a weird one for him in that situation. But yeah, his first game back was, by all accounts, pretty excellent. I thought he looked pretty comfortable, which is the main thing to see from, like, I sort of expected him to be a little bit more shaky than he was, but nah, just nice and assured, real solid performance. It was actually coincidentally against Michael Boxall's Minnesota United too, and Michael Boxall did play that game. He actually scored an own goal in the second half as Minnesota lost 2-1, so that was the winning goal, his own goal. But so it goes. That's football for you. Winston Reid, I worked out, is the 19th New Zealander to play MLS football now. So you consider 19 players all time. Not all the 8 that are under contract at the moment have played. I don't think Noah Billingsley hasn't and Kyle Adams hasn't. But still, like, of the 19 players in history from New Zealand who have played in this competition, 6 of them are currently active players as well. That's another indication of what's going on with all that. But mostly, yeah, if there's a theme to this week's Flying Kiwis, which there is, and this is what it is, it's that it's just lovely to have old mate Winston Reid back. Well, we've got all these really exciting young players coming through, but you still want the old guard holding it down as well. And when he's been off the scene for a long time, like you said, has felt like a hibernation. He's just been like on another planet for a while, but he's back, man. He's back.
He's on equal footing as Matua Ross. So he's the football version of Matua Ross.
Great comparison.
That's who he is. We'll get your little quick takes around the world with the rest of our Flying Kiwis. While we were talking some football there, I just thought of Tyler Boyd, and I just did a quick little search for Tyler Boyd, but that got me thinking, like, there's one, I want to see the All Whites face Australia, and as regularly and as just as frequently as possible. I also really want to see the All Whites maybe in, like, give them a year of, like, obviously you're not going to have full training with an All Whites team, but maybe a year of regular, or not regular, but somewhat regular fixtures. To be honest, the All Whites need to play as much football as they can. Like, they got to cash in on this crop of talent. So give them a good little period to get together, have a few training camps, play some games, then fucking take on USA. That's what I reckon. And I would put the USA contest between the All Whites and USA slightly below the footballing grudge matches that I want to see between the All Whites and Australia. It goes All Whites versus Australia, then All Whites versus USA. That's what I want to see. That will get me heated in the footballing department.
Absolutely. I mean, that's yeah, if they can sort that out, it would be lovely. The funny thing about that is the football ferns have played both those two teams, like both those two countries, relatively regularly. I mean, they played Australia in that little Cup of Nations thing about 18 months ago or something. They play America every couple of years, it seems, and I've seen it mentioned, like, the reason they play America as often as they do is because American football, American soccer, beg your pardon, has a whole lot of money, so they'll actually pay to host the football ferns, whereas New Zealand football won't because they don't have that kind of money. So they end up playing these good rich teams because they can afford to actually, like, pay for a few things, which I suppose makes sense. The All Whites did play America maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and they drew 1-1, and Monty Patterson scored. Monty the Python Patterson, remember him? He's gone
Monty
completely
Python
off the scene. I think he's playing lower league in Norway last time I heard. He scored a goal off the bench, I think, and they drew 1-1. It was one of the absolutely very, very rare games in which Anthony Hudson coached All Whites actually got a result against a non-Oceania opposition. So, one for the record books, I suppose, but it was not his full-strength American team. I'll also chuck that one out there. But if we could do that again with something close to a top-strength All Whites, would be very tasty.
The All Whites versus Australia matchup is something that I want to see just for football in this part of the world, right? It's just, I want to see the biggest. Maybe this is an idea, like we're looking at a possible Joseph Parker versus Junior Fa boxing match in Australia. They've got some boxing bout between some two jokers who that has Australia whipped up into a frenzy. But that's got me thinking, like, in the pandemic world, maybe it's just better to tighten up and focus on the biggest matchups, the biggest events you can have, either in New Zealand or in Australia and New Zealand. So I think, like, for football in this part of the world, New Zealand versus the Australia would be epic. Like, if you can have a regular match between New Zealand and Australia for the benefit of football in this part of the world, it would be amazing. Like, to the point that you just need to make it happen because it would just blow up football. Like, you would have rabid fan bases on either side frothing for that contest. But the team I want the All Whites to beat the most is USA, because it's just such an underdog situation, and obviously USA think they're God's gift to life's existence, and nothing would make me happier than the All Whites beating USA.
And their football team has sucked recently. They didn't even make the last World Cup, so they're actually vulnerable. Like, it's one of those, like, I would love to see the All Whites beat Brazil or Germany or England, but we know that's probably not going to happen. They maybe could beat USA, though. Like, maybe they could. It's feasible.
I don't know, wildcard, because with the amount of talent coming through Aotearoa football,
maybe we would beat Brazil, yeah.
Anything's feasible. Well, take us hard and fast around the grounds, around the world, with what's tickling your toes with the Flying Kiwis, other than old hibernation Winnie Reid.
Yeah, post-hibernation Winnie Reid. I would say the toe ticklers have probably been the goals. Ali Riley got on the score sheet in Sweden, playing for Rosengard, which is not how you pronounce that in Swedish, but obviously I have no idea how to pronounce Swedish words. She got the first goal in a 3-0 win over the team who was top of the table and are now second on the table because they've overtaken them on goal difference with that. And it was a lovely little goal as well, cutting inside from left back, beating a defender, slamming it in the near post, getting the team off to a lovely start there and getting the victory. She's on loan from Orlando Pride, which is a funky little situation because no one really knows what's happening with, like, the MLS is back into it now, playing regular season games, but no one really knows what's happening with the National Women's Soccer League in America. It doesn't seem like they're probably going to have any more of a 2020 season after their tournament that they played. And the Orlando players didn't even get to play the tournament because they had a COVID outbreak within the squad beforehand. So what we're seeing at the moment is this weird little situation where a bunch of, it's not even weird, it's just completely understandable. They're loaning out their players because their players are like, well, we're not going to just not play and for the entire year, especially with Olympics coming up next year as well. So a lot of the better players from Orlando are getting loaned around the place. Ali Riley was one of the first ones out of there to reconnect with the team that she played with in Sweden for about 7 or 8 years before she went to Chelsea and then Bayern Munich and then Orlando. So yeah, that was her first goal for Rosengård for, I think, 3.5 years or something like that, which is, lovely to see. She doesn't score a lot of them, so it's always impressive when she does. Interesting note on all them loanies as well, too, because a couple of them, including Alana Kennedy, who's an Australian international defender, have gone on loan to Tottenham, which is where Rhea Percival plays, and there's another player, their goalkeeper, I think, has gone on loan to a team in Iceland, which happens to be the same team that Betsy Hassett plays for as well. So there's they're not alone. Like, there are other Orlando players that have gone to other clubs that don't have Flying Kiwis connections, Football Ferns connections. But I'll just throw that out there, that maybe there's a little bit of like Agent Alley going on there and sorting out some of these deals. Maybe that's wishful thinking, but it'd be fun. Who else scored goals this week? Ryan De Vries scored a goal for Sligo Rovers in the League of Ireland, which is outstanding. Like, he's had a tough time of it because, well, he's a dude who scored. He's a 1-cap All White as well. Still waiting for that second cap. I think there was some worry about eligibility for a while there, in amongst all the worries about everyone else's eligibility too. So I don't actually know where they stand with that, but Brian De Vries is a dude who scored goals for fun for several years for Auckland City. Then he went to Japan, but he played for a second-tier team in Japan who were terrible and lost every week. He didn't get a lot of goals there. So seeing him going to Ireland was a pretty cool development for him, to a decent team there as well. He's played really well for them in the last sort of 4 or 5 games since their league has resumed. It was tough for him for a while there because he signed there. He didn't get a game because they had to, he had to fly back to New Zealand and lockdowns and all this for several months. And now he's really hitting the ground running as they're going there. And you don't see a lot of Kiwis playing in Ireland as well, so that's a cool one. And he's winning a lot of fans. Scored a lovely goal, his first for the club. And Joe Bell also scored his first goal for the club. For Viking in Norway, he dropped to the bench. He'd been starting pretty much every game for about the last 2 months. Dropped to the bench in this game because the team hadn't been doing very well and they had to sacrifice something. They decided to take a defensive midfielder out of their formation. So Bell drops to the bench, then he comes on, scores, I think it was the second in a 2-0 win. So he came on, played about 5 minutes, scored the goal that sealed it. Another nice finish, just like Ali Riley smacking one into the bottom near post, this time on the counter-attack, Joe Bell. And there was another goal, wasn't there? Yeah, Jesse Edge scored, and the Swedish Etan, which is the 3rd or 4th tier. It goes Allsvenskan, then the Super Etan, then the Etan. So 3rd tier. And yeah, he scored I think it was 80-something, the early 80 minutes, somewhere in that range, equalizer, a direct free kick, really nice strike. Unfortunately, his team, who are bottom of the table in their side of the conference, then went on, after he'd been subbed off as well, went on and conceded a 92nd minute winner. So didn't get a point or anything to show for it, but it was a lovely goal and a lovely highlight. He's also, this is AFK Berger, the team he plays for, and they also, at the same time as signing Jesse Edge, signed Matty Conroy, another young Kiwi fella, a younger Kiwi fella even, and he made his debut off the bench in this game as well, played about half an hour at the end of things. So goal scoring week for the Flying Kiwis, and read all about it on the August 25th edition, which will be published very soon after we record and before you listen to this podcast.
Lovely jubbly. We'll slide over to the rugby league situation where we had Stephen Marsters make his debut for the South Sydney Rabbitohs at right centre. The Rabbitohs had Stephen Marsters at centre and Jackson Paulo, who made his debut earlier in the season, playing right wing. They're the only 2 Kiwi NRL players that have got game time this year for the Rabbitohs. And then we had Paul Turner make his debut for the Warriors in the halves, played on the left side of the field, very light on his feet, and I'll talk more about Turner into a lead-in about the Warriors, but the thing about Paul Turner that I'm finding interesting is a super nerdy like rugby league thing, because when you watch Roger Tuivasa-Sheck step, you're looking at a very impactful step. A very powerful step. And I'm saying step intentionally because it's not necessarily like plural steps. He'll just like run and then he'll put on a big whack and he'll make a defender miss. Paul Turner, on the other hand, had a couple of no tries, and when he got the ball he looked very dangerous, but he kind of bounces. Maybe it's shorter steps and more of them, because he can change direction very quickly. But it just looks different to someone with great footwork like Roger Tuivasa-Sheck. So that's if anyone found that interesting, that's cool. Stephen Marsters wildcard. You'd know a bit about Stephen Marsters because he was with the Dragons, and there's a couple of layers of funk to this, because Stephen Marsters and Patrick Herbert were both 2-time junior Kiwis during their time with the Dragons, and the Dragons let both of them go for whatever reason. Patrick Herbert went to the Warriors, and then last year the Rabbitohs signed Stephen Marsters. But what's happened at the Rabbitohs is the Rabbitohs developed a kid named by the name of Mawene Hiroti, who has also played junior Kiwis. He also, I believe he played in the same New Zealand under-18 team as Marsters. Let me just flick through and try and pull that up. Not quite yet. The Rabbitohs developed him, like they brought him across from New Plymouth, put him in the Rabbitohs system, and Mawane Hiroti was in the same. So the 2017 New Zealand under-18 team had Hayes Perham at fullback, Mawane Hiroti on the wing, Jackson Paulo on the wing, Paul Turner in the halves, and then Stephen Marsters was part of the wider squad, and Jordan Ricky was there as well. So the Rabbitohs developed Mawane Hiroti, and then they let him go to the Sharks for this season, and midway through last season, they signed Jackson Paulo from the Gold Coast Titans, and they also signed Stephen Marsters. So they let go of one centre wing prospect from Aotearoa after signing Jackson Paulo and Stephen Marsters. I'm not sure why the Rabbitohs did that. I'm not sure. Mawane Hiroti is now with the Cronulla Sharks. Hasn't played for the Sharks yet. So I'm not sure what the Rabbitohs' rationale behind all of that was. However, they intentionally signed two prospects from Aotearoa. I don't know why. Marsters and Paulo have, Paulo was part of Totaheri Rugby League programs. He moved to the Gold Coast at a young age, but he's always been loosely involved with New Zealand Rugby League system initiatives. And then, as I alluded to, he did play for the New Zealand under-18 team. And Stephen Marsters is one of the most decorated junior prospects, along with the likes of Paul Turner, Christian Tuipulotu, Jordan Ricky. So just a bit of background about the Rabbitohs recruitment initiatives that I can't make sense of. However, it's led to Stephen Marsters making his debut alongside Jackson Paulo. Very cool. And also, so Stephen Marsters scored a try on debut, had a nice little grubber to force a repeat set, and then there was in the wash-up after his debut game, Stephen Marsters basically said that he was going through a rough patch to start this year personally, and that led to some unprofessional habits creeping in, and Wayne Bennett gave him the talking to. Like you just said, you got to sort your shit out. You got to, lose a couple kgs. You got to be a lot more professional in your training and your preparation. And then Stephen Marsters makes his debut. So big shout out to Stephen Marsters. Immense talent coming through the Dragons system alongside Patrick Herbert, two-time junior Kiwi, made all the age group kind of teams, goes to the Rabbitohs, gets a debut. He's also the cousin of Eason Marsters, but they refer to each other as brothers. I think their family's very close, and they're basically like brothers. So big shout out to the Marsters whānau as well. Of course, Stephen Marsters has already played International Rugby League for the Cook Islands also. Then we come to Paul Turner. The Rabbitohs connections here as well, because Paul Turner, I believe the Rabbitohs scouted Paul Turner from his time with Northland Rugby League. So Paul Turner and Dylan Brown, same. I actually think they were part of the same club, the Otaika Eagles. Yes, Paul Turner and Dylan Brown, same junior club up in Northland. Do you know where Otaika is, Wildcard?
Yeah, Otaika Valley, I think, is just south of Whangarei, sort of on the outer stretches. You drive through just right before you come into town. I'm pretty sure that's Otaika Valley. I could be wrong though, because I get all the place names confused.
Right, well, they were homies. They were homies, part of the same rep team as well. And then Dylan Brown goes to the Eels. Paul Turner goes to the Rabbitohs, along with his older brother Lee Turner. Lee Turner followed Paul Turner throughout this journey, But Lee Turner last year popped up playing reserve grade in Queensland for the Tweed Head Seagulls, and that caught my eye because they are a feeder club to the Gold Coast Titans. So I'm not sure what's happening there. Obviously no reserve grade footy, so I'm not too sure where Lee Turner sits, but I was interested that maybe he could work his way through that system. But again, that's just very nerdy of me. So the Turner brothers are with the Rabbitohs. Then they come back to the Warriors, and both of them play under 20s for the Warriors, and then Lee Turner doesn't get many more opportunities. Paul Turner comes through the Warriors system to make his debut for the Warriors against the Bulldogs, and was pretty damn impressive. So very exciting times for Kiwi Rugby League, and I've said it a couple times, 11 debutants this year. The full list, I believe. Now, this includes Eliasa Katoa, who came from Tonga to Tamaki College. So I am including him in the Kiwi NRL category. He's got an interesting eligibility decision to make himself, whether he adds himself to the ever epic Tonga forward pack, or he might want to, for whatever reason, align himself with the Aotearoa Kiwis. Here is the Kiwi NRL debutants of 2020, the class of 2020 thus far. Stephen Marsters is from Auckland. Paul Turner is from Northland. Christian Tuipulotu, he's from Auckland with the Roosters. Jordan Ricky is from Christchurch. He's with the Broncos. Emre Perry is from Waikato. He's with the Cowboys. Connolly Lamelu is from Auckland. He's with the Cowboys. Dejan Asi, he is from Christchurch. He's with the Cowboys. Jackson Paulo from Auckland with the Rabbitohs. Asu Kepaoa, he is from Auckland. He's with the Tigers. And Jackson Ferris, he's from Manawatu, and he is with the Sharks. I'm getting a bit crazy here, Wildcard, because there's a forum, the White Line Fever forum, and then there's a thread that a very lovely person posts a lot of the New Zealand Rugby League junior squads. Obviously, New Zealand Rugby League, like many organisations throughout Aotearoa, don't make it very easy to find this information, which would be very beneficial to everyone involved, but they kind of do a shit job like every other organisation. So I have to use the forums to find this information, and all these players who are making these debuts have been heavy in the New Zealand NRL pipeline. So they've all played age group rugby league together. Like I named that New Zealand under-18 team. There was also the New Zealand residents under-18 team, where you had Chanel Harris-Tavita, Paul Turner, Hayes Perham, all in the same team together. You've got like New Zealand secondary schools teams, where all these dudes are playing together. So now we're seeing the power of New Zealand Rugby League, development initiatives, age group rep teams. Over the past 5 years, there's been real growth and a lot of great work done at the grassroots level throughout Aotearoa with development pipelines and all that stuff. Now it's flowing into the NRL, and there's so many little tidbits about age group teams where these players play together. Earlier this year, you had Asu Kepaoa making his debut, and he used to play junior football with Stafford Toa, who's been on the wing for the Newcastle Knights. I think there was a Ellerslie Eagles team where like all these dudes played for the same Ellerslie Eagles team, which is crazy in itself. Let me just find a bit more information on that, because that one was real interesting. Yeah, so forget all that shit. And also, another little nugget here, Wildcard. This one's a beauty. The New Zealand Māori under-17 backline from 2015. Stephen Marsters is at fullback. Jackson Ferris is on the wing. Hayes Perham is in the halves. And then Morgan Harper, who made his debut last season with the Bulldogs, now signed with the Manly Seagulls. He was named at halfback in this New Zealand under-17 Māori team from 2015. Now he's playing centre for the Bulldogs, now signed to the Manly Seagulls. But all four of those players have moved into the NRL. So, as I said before, I can get a bit crazy with all this kind of historical information about the players that are making their debuts. They've all, not all of them. Another interesting thing here, Wildcard, is that you've got these highly decorated juniors. Stephen Marsters, Paul Turner, Christian Tuipulotu, Jordan Rickey. Emery Perry was a 2-time junior Kiwi while living in Australia. But then you've got other players who, like Connolly Lamelu, he was at Tangaroa College in Auckland playing rugby union, and then Kibra Park scouted him from his rugby union, goes to Kibra Park, plays well with Kibra Park, gets into the Tigers system. So Connolly Lamelu completely bypassed the New Zealand Rugby League pipeline. Dejan Arce went from Christchurch. He went to live in like Gold Coast or Brisbane. I'm not sure if that was a family move or not. But then he's playing like first 15 rugby in Queensland, makes various like representative teams, gets signed by the Cowboys. He's never represented Aotearoa age group footy or junior Kiwis. So it's a weird mix of like really highly decorated juniors with all that historical information that I kind of lose my head when I dive into. And then you've got other players who just pop up randomly. And it's fairly interesting just looking at how these players make it to the NRL.
Yeah, I often feel like that I see that kind of thing in football sometimes too, where it's like a lot of, especially in New Zealand, a lot of the focus in recent time, not so much in immediate recent times, but like pre-recent times, but still recent times, if that makes any sense at all, is often about those age group teams coming in, like the national reps. And I'm like, well, what about the players who miss out on the national reps? Like the guys who were there or thereabouts, or maybe guys who are just in the wrong part of the country and didn't get noted, because those things tended to be real heavy Auckland bases, like Auckland, not based, but large, like mostly full of Auckland citizens, up until recently, where you have like the Wellington Phoenix Academy and the Ole Academy, both based out of the wider Wellington area. Now probably the two dominant feeder prospects for those, actually drawing players from Auckland down to those regions. For example, so you want to be able to see pathways at all levels. Like you need to have these pathways drawn out to get the best of the best through players who are going to get the most coaching with the top like coaches and whatever, and however that works out. Because in the NRL, we're talking like a club-based thing as well, so it's also different and a few extra variables in that manner. But you also want to give, like, there needs to be room for the late bloomers to come through too, or the people who just missed out at younger levels. It's one of them fascinating kind of sports scientist kind of things. And as to feeling a little bit crazy about it, you remind me of the words of the great Sturgill Simpson when he said, "Forgive me if I may seem a little crazy, but goddamn, sometimes crazy how I feel."
And it's beautiful. It's absolutely marvelous. It is I won't repeat the word crazy. These are special times if you're coming from that Kiwi NRL perspective, because it felt as though there was a Kiwi NRL takeover brewing 4 years ago. And now it's just hit like a whole different stratosphere. And all these players are coming from no reserve grade footy. So all these players are stepping into NRL having not played any rugby league. Because there's no under 20s, there's no reserve grade. So it's a credit to them as individuals, and obviously their team and how they're developing players, that these players are contributing Like Jackson Ferris hasn't played again since making his debut. Christian Tuipulotu hasn't played again since making his debut. But they do a good job. I think they both scored a try on debut. So when they step in, they're doing their job for their team and they are contributing. What did you watch?
Just on that note, like, presumably then, I know the Warriors are a little bit of a special case within a special case because of the whole, like, doing the quarantine thing, but presumably that means Paul Turner must have been training with the first grade team this whole time, right? Like, they obviously didn't fly him over to make his debut because, whoever got injured, he must have, he must have been with the team the whole time, right? So I wonder if that's a factor as well. Like, the lack of reserve grade, you want that. Like, you need to be getting those games under your belts, but there's also something to be said for, like, doing the Sarpreet Singh thing of not playing a lot of games with Bayern Munich, but training with them consistently for a long time.
Yeah, but that's no different to a normal season, because if you're part of the first grade squad, you're going to be training with the squad full time anyway, and then you only drop down a tier come game time for reserve grade.
Right, yeah.
But Paul Turner has been, like, the Warriors had to have their full kind of squad over in Australia, so he's been there, but there was a lot of caution around throwing the young players in. Like, there's a guy, Rocco Berry, who the Warriors signed from St. Pat's Silverstream in Wellington, first 15 rugby. I think his father was an All Black. And I think he's with the Warriors throughout this time, but it's like he might be ready, but this was his first season of rugby league. And so, he had a full off-season of rugby league training with the Warriors. He started at fullback in reserve grade, but it's a bit rough to chuck him into the NRL, literally kind of in your second or third game of semi-professional rugby league. So I think there's been a lot of caution from the Warriors with their younger players, and that's why you've seen a lot of the lone players come in. But the lone players do fill a job because the Warriors do have suffered a lot of injuries, but a lesser important factor of that is a lot of their, like, top 30 or development players are very young, are a bit raw, and it would be a really tough ask for them to contribute at an NRL level, especially wildcard now that the Warriors they're tied, well, they're 12th on points differential, but 12th, 11th, 10th, and 9th, including your Dragons, all have 12 points. And the Warriors have, their last 4 games, they're 3-1. So, now, those 3 wins have come against the Tigers, Sea Eagles, and Bulldogs. So, they got a tougher game this week against the Newcastle Knights. But they're right there chasing a top 8 spot, as are your Dragons, who have also undergone a lot of difficulties and turmoil this season. So there's a level of competition that is still available to the Warriors. You don't want to just be like, give up, chuck all the young blokes in. They are still trying to win games of footy, and there's some interesting things happening with the Warriors, and I think a lot of it has been forced. Like, you lose Ken Mamalo and you lose Fusatua as your wingers, and it has a huge impact on how the Warriors play their rugby league, because they've gone from using 2 battering rams on their wings. Now there's more speed on the field. Like, George Jennings just runs fast. Adam Pompey, not so much, but he's quick enough. But I think more about Patrick Herbert. Like, he's lively. He's vibrant with how he runs. Jazz Tavanga's come in. Now, sure, he played 3 games before a lot of those players went back to New Zealand and they lost all 3 games. But now, like, he's settled into that Warriors team returning from injury, and he's just doing what he does best, just like bobbing around, taking some hefty hit-ups, offloading the footy, breaking tackles. And I feel like this version of the Warriors, there are signs. Again, their wins have come against bottom 8 teams. You still have to win those games, but there are signs that there is a different style of play here with the Warriors. Everyone's a bit more agile. Everyone's a bit quicker. Adam Blair's had a couple line breaks over the last few weeks where he's getting a short ball off Tohu Harris and bursting through the line. So now there's a bit of the forwards passing to each other. You get rid of Blake Green, regardless of whether it's Chanel Harris-Tavita, Cody Nikorima, or Paul Turner, all three of those young players, well, all three of those halves are a million times more dynamic than Blake Green. So I kind of feel as though the forced changes and the forced rotation of Warriors players has inadvertently led to a style of footy that is far more conducive to winning games in 2020. And that's something to keep an eye on moving forward. Like, they're just faster, they're more skillful, they're more agile, better footwork, better skill. They actually, this is the whole crux of the idea here, Wildcard. To start the season, I bemoaned a lack of identity. I bemoaned a lack of actual playing style. And over the last few weeks, even in losses to the Roosters and Panthers, over the last few weeks, now I can see an identity. Now I can see how the Warriors want to play their footy. And that's a good thing. That's regardless of how the Warriors finish their season, whether they make the top 8, which will be a miracle, but if they do make the top 8 or not, it's just been good that the Warriors have found a way to play footy in this back end of the 2020 season, and that has eased a lot of my frustrations, because you're watching the Warriors play and you're like, holy shit, what are they actually doing on the rugby league field? What are they aiming to? What's their game plan? What are they trying to do here? How are they going to do it? None of that was evident before. Now, through natural causes and just weird shit happening, this is a Warriors team that throws the footy around. They look like they're having fun. They're a lot faster, more agile, more skillful, and there's just something to them. There's an identity. We are the Warriors, and this is what we're going to fucking do.
On that note, how does my boy Ewan Aiken fit into all that future planning?
I'll drop this before I get to Ewan Aiken, and Ewan Aiken is part of a trend that I can see with the Warriors recruitment. Whether it's the 11 Kiwi NRL debutants, or whether it's a slightly resurgent Warriors team, all of that is immensely positive when we forecast forward to 2020 and beyond, and we look at the impact of Phil Gould. Because the debutants show that the Kiwi NRL takeover is real, that Rugby League in New Zealand is in a really strong position, regardless of lockdown, regardless of no or minimal kind of tournaments and age group stuff, representative footy in Aotearoa. Phil Gould's coming into a landscape that is very healthy. And if it's not the debutants, it's Dylan Brown being amazing every week. Jerome Hughes with the Melbourne Storm. Across the NRL, there are really good Kiwi NRL players. And with the Warriors, their slight resurgence has come on the back of young players. So just keep that in your mind, people, when you're thinking about Phil Gould's impact moving forward. He's coming into a situation that is pretty healthy already, and he's going to work some magic and make it a lot better. Ewan Aiken is someone who is designed to play rugby league. He's naturally explosive. I'm not talking about getting into the weeds of his like statistics or his defensive reads or those kind of things. When you look at Ewan Aitken, you think he's just someone designed to play rugby league. And again, looking at the Warriors' resurgence, who are some of the key players? It's Peta Hiku. It's Jazz Tavanga. Tohu Harris and Adam Blair have been good as well. All of those players they're just natural ballers. I've said it before. And I'll throw it up again. They're just natural footy players. That's what is working for the Warriors right now. Paul Turner. Vibrant, lively. He just loves playing footy. And when I look at the Warriors' recruitment strategy under Paul O'Sullivan, or Peter O'Sullivan, holy shit, that was a mind blank. Mr. O'Sullivan, in the forward pack, they're going with size. Ben Murdoch-Masila, Kane Evans, bigger people. That's what you need. You don't want, like, the Warriors have had good servants, but a lot of their forwards have been the same size. You're looking between 180 centimeters and 188 centimeters off the top of my head. Guys like Sam Lasoni, Bunty Afo, Ignatius Parsi, those type of characters are all a similar body shape. In the forwards that the Warriors are signing, even Toby Rudolph, who I've got no idea is actually coming or not, he's massive. So there's a clear trend in the forwards that the Warriors are trying to recruit. They're all bigger and they're mobile. That's the idea. You get to the back line and you just want natural footy players. And you'd know a bit better than me, Wildcard, and you might think Ewan Aitken's shit from his time at the Dragons. You might think he's the man. Either way, I'm sure when you look at Ewan Aitken, you think that's just someone who belongs on a rugby league field in a very, very different way to Zach Lomax. Zach Lomax is a naturally gifted footy player, but I get the feeling Zach Lomax is the type of dude who's probably good at a lot of sports. He's a natural athlete. He's a natural, chuck me any ball and I can do some shit. He's a naturally gifted athlete. And that works just as well, because you just want instinct. You want natural gifts, as well as obviously work ethic and all that shit. But when I think Ewan Aitken, and I think why the Warriors have signed him under Mr. O'Sullivan, because it's Mr. O'Sullivan doing all these signings. Nathan Brown himself said that Mr. O'Sullivan, I'm going to keep rolling with Mr. O'Sullivan. I like that. I like Mr. O'Sullivan. It rolls off the tongue. Mr. O'Sullivan.
Yeah, it's got a nice sort of like headmaster feel to it.
And that's what he's doing, because Nathan Brown himself said that Mr. O'Sullivan is now just implementing the plan that was already in place. So this isn't Nathan Brown coming in and saying, I want Kane Evans, I want Ewan Aitken. These are my kind of players. Nathan Brown has said, because he's always on the Triple M Saturday show, pops up on the Sunday show as well. So I listen to a lot of Nathan Brown. And if you're a Warriors fan, tune in, because your coach is talking rugby league every weekend. And it's a podcast you can sign up to, just like what you're listening to right now. It's Mr. O'Sullivan doing all these things, and he's operating off a plan that he's already put in place. Now, obviously, Mr. O'Sullivan and Nathan Brown are working together as far as like looking towards the future and building for next season. But these recruitment decisions are coming from Mr. O'Sullivan, and I believe he's looking for size and he's looking for natural ballers. Can you fill me in? How do you think Ewan Aitken fits into what I've outlined there?
Well, I've always really liked Ewan Aitken. I've thought he was a real good player. He's been a little bit in and out in the last 2 years, so I'm not shocked to see him leaving, but he has sort of established himself as the starting centre once again this season. I think there's been a couple injuries, which is also why he's probably happy to leave at the end of the season, probably the right time, whatever. But yeah, I've always loved watching him play because he's just like, he's a ball of muscle. He's like, I can't think of a better way to describe him. Like, he's not, he's quick because he's powerful, but he's not big. Like, he looks pretty small. He looks undersized, but he's just so strong for his size. He breaks tackles because of that. He can, he's slightly quicker than you expect because of that. He can run decent lines. He's not a great passer. And it is interesting, like, the comparison between him and Zach Lomax, because, like, you're right, like, they're very different types of athletes, very different types of players, and I think the Dragons, being where they are right now, are probably leaning a bit more on the Lomax type of player, and interesting that the Warriors are therefore looking more on the Aiken type of player, so I don't know, I mean...
Can I just pop in there?
Yeah, go for it.
I don't think they're looking for an Aiken type of player. I think you're looking for... Well, it's not necessarily what you're looking for. It's like, you can have Ewan Aiken on one edge and Zach Lomax on the other edge.
Well,
that gives you variety in attack. Yeah. Same thing if you have Ewan Aiken on one edge and Peter Hiku on the other edge. Like, Peter Hiku and Zach Lomax are extremely similar in how naturally gifted they are at rugby league. I think ultimately it's just about variety. So you need different shapes and sizes and skill sets in your forward pack. And then every single player in your backline has to do something slightly different. So you've got Cody Nikarima, who's really lively and dynamic off the mark. And then you've got Chanel Harris-Tavita, who's got a left-footed kicking game. He's a bit more silky, bit bigger, different shape, different size, different skill set. Peter Hiku's very skillful. And then if you want to go to Ewan Aiken, you've got a different kind of threat. And I think there's just a lot of the thinking is variety in terms of, we don't want too many players like this, and we don't want too many players like that. We want a nice mix across our team, I think, is the another crux of the trends.
Yeah, which gives you options, doesn't it? And Aiken, at the very least, is going to be a solid, dependable player. Like, in the very least, he will be able to, if you create something for him, he'll be able to finish it off. If you
Ewan Aiken's also not going to be expensive.
Under the pump defensively, he won't make a stupid error. He's got good enough hands. He can tackle well. He'll in the very least give you solid, dependable minutes at on either side as a center as well. So you can't go wrong with a signing like that. That's for sure. And then if you can surround him with creative, flowing players, I think that's what I sort of meant by the Dragons kind of leaning away from him. I think when the Dragons have a lot of inconsistencies in the halves over the last 2 years, I think they probably want to be able to create a little bit more with maybe someone who can throw a few more offloads, or someone who has a bit of a step, someone who can break a game rather than just playing that playing the game as it is sort of thing and doing that to the best of your ability, someone who can actually change things. Little more dynamic, I don't know, I think that's probably what the Dragons are thinking, but the Warriors have players like that already, more than the Dragons currently have. It's just a matter of they don't quite have the depth in their squad, perhaps. We've spoken about this supposed Warriors rebuild. The foundations of a rebuild are already there. They have a Dally M caliber fullback. They have a lot of very good players, and they're not that many signings away from being a decent top 8 team. And from there, a good coach will take you a little further. On top of that, a few more good young players from the recruitment ranks, from your academy and stuff like that, take you even further, kind of thing. That's how you turn into somewhere down the line. Most teams don't get there, but you at least aspire to do what the Roosters and the Storm have been doing for the last decade. That's the gold standard. So someone like Aiken adds to the depth. He gives you some variety. It's like I said, you can't really go wrong with a signing like that, I suppose.
Definitely not. And there's one factor, I think, Kane Evans, Ewan Aiken, they're not going to get big money. These are just nifty bits of recruitment to get value for money. And the other trend that I see here is that they have all played a lot of NRL footy. So the Warriors aren't signing players from reserve grade. They're signing players who are in the NRL and you can plug and play. Like, you can literally put Kane Evans in the Warriors team right now and you don't have to think like, oh, this young forward's going to have to develop. He's going to have to learn. No, Ewan Aitken and Kane Evans, regardless of how good you think they are, regardless of the impact you think they might have, their experience and their know-how, they can be put in an NRL situation immediately, and it's not hindering the Warriors or any club who does that either. So I think there are some clear trends and clear operational methods to what Mr. O'Sullivan's doing. And bigger picture, I'm fascinated by how this all plays out with Phil Gould coming in, not only with the Warriors, also with the wider rugby league situation in Aotearoa. We'll wrap it up there, Wildcat. That was another hefty podcast, but I didn't feel like it, so that's always a good sign.
Like 30 minutes into that, I was wondering if we were going through it a little too quickly, and then all of a sudden we're at 2 hours. So that's the sign of a good podcast, I think, when it flows nicely like that.
Kia kaha. Stay beautiful, smile, be grateful, and express that gratitude. Cha-cha!